I'm a big fan of Nathaniel Bandy's timed challenges, so much so, I wanted to try out a similar idea with a series I'm more familiar with. I'm going to see how many Fire Emblem games I can finish in only 30 hours. For this challenge, the only goal is to defeat the final boss, so things like side quests and paralogs aren't mandatory. I will also only count down the time when I'm actively playing the games, that way I can still take breaks whenever I want to. Since there's so much content to get through, let's not waste any more time and get right into it. The first game I got started with was Fire Emblem Awakening. Not only do I know this game super well, but I was honestly just in the mood to replay it anyway, so I thought this was a good starting point. Since I've put so much time into this game, the first 4 chapters went down really easily. What I usually do is lead with Robin and Chrom, then let other units like Vake and Sully clean out any other enemies that could be a problem. Vake did come somewhat close to dying near the end of Chapter 2, but other than that, the early game was no problem. Chapter 3 is where things start to pick up a bit. This chapter moves a little slower only because the best strategy is to split up your army and move towards the locked gates. This chapter is also where we gain access to Sumiya, a unit that starts out somewhat weak but quickly snowballs into a powerful tank later on. Even though this chapter took a little bit, I really didn't struggle that much. Chapter 4 is actually a little scary since the enemies can deal a good amount of damage if you're not careful. Sumiya came real close to dying, and Lucina did a good chunk of damage to Chrom. Even though things looked like they were going downhill, I was able to defeat Lucina with Sully, then continue on. Chapter 5 is where the difficulty starts to ramp up a bit. Not only is the map full of strong enemies, but Maribel and Rickon spawn in the middle of them, so keeping them safe is a little awkward. As long as you lead with Frederick and Chrom, this chapter becomes a little easier, but you still do have to pay attention. If you thought Chapter 5 was bad, oh man, is Chapter 6 even worse. Lots of strong enemies can easily overwhelm you if you're not careful. Believe me when I say, making good use of your healers is mandatory for this chapter. Even though there's lots of enemies, as long as you take your time and don't overextend, it can be finished. Continuing on, Chapters 7, 8, and 9 honestly played fairly similarly to Chapters 5 and 6. There is a high enemy density in these maps, but as long as you take your time, they aren't that hard. During these maps, I was able to pick up 2 very useful units, Noe and Tharja. Noe does start off a bit weak, but her growth rates and stat bonuses she gets from the Dragonstone make her a real heavy hitter in the mid and late game. On the other hand, Tharja starts out as a dark mage, meaning she can use dark magic like Ruin, Waste, and Nosferatu. Those are some extremely powerful tomes that we're gonna want to make use of whenever they're available. Tharja sadly does have low luck and skill, but she still performs very well when you invest in her a bit. Something I love about Awakening is that basically every unit is viable for the campaign, but I still want to try and grab as many strong units as I can. Chapter 10 is honestly one of my favorite maps in this game. The music in the preparations menu has so much weight to it, you can almost feel a story just in the music alone. Reasons like this is why I love Fire Emblem Awakening so much. Almost every part of this game is executed so well. Everything has significance, even if it's only for a moment. Anyways, enough gushing about this game. I almost always forget that the goal for this chapter is to defeat the boss instead of the usual route all enemies. Even if the goal is simple, I wanted to defeat as many enemies as I could to gain some extra levels. This game has a noticeable difficulty spike in the next chapter, so I wanted to make sure I was prepared. Getting started with Chapter 11, I think this map just has way too many enemies. They can easily flood in from every corner of the map, so it's really easy to have your units get overwhelmed. Thankfully, I was able to get through this map with less trouble than usual, but still, the difficulty spike here is a little too much in my opinion. Chapter 12 was a bit easier, but still was a little challenging. What I usually do is split up my army into 3 parts near the start, then have them join back together once they clear out the enemies near the bottom of the map. During this chapter, you're also given a Beast Killer Lance, which almost trivializes this map. Not only that, but I was also able to make good use out of Crom's Rapier and Vake's Hammer. A lot of the enemies in this map are either mounted or armored units, so I was kind of just running on autopilot for this one. Once I got through all the enemies, I defeated the boss, then continued on. These next couple chapters were actually not too bad. For chapter 13, I just had Sumiya fly Robin over to the boss, and he was able to take it out with very little trouble. Chapter 14 was a very similar story. I didn't have the greatest start since a couple of my units died, but Robin was once again able to take out the boss very quickly. Chapter 15 does have the potential to be difficult, but by this point, a decent amount of my units were in promoted classes, so taking them down wasn't that much of a struggle. During this chapter, I also gain access to another very good unit. Sayri is actually pretty solid. She's nothing groundbreaking, but she comes in a promoted class with good stats and good growth rates, so I thought she would be useful to keep in my army. Moving on to chapter 16, this map is once again full of tough enemies, but all my units are either as strong or stronger than them, so I'm really not too worried about it. As much as I wanted to just rush towards the boss, I knew my units would die super quickly, so I just played this one slowly. After a couple uneventful turns, I was able to defeat the boss, then continue on to chapter 17. This chapter is honestly one of my least favorite in the game, only because of how thin it stretches your army. All your units are separated into groups of about 4 to 5, so it's genuinely kind of difficult to keep them all alive. Thankfully, I didn't lose any units, but a few did come pretty close to kicking the bucket. After that challenging first push, the rest of the chapter actually wasn't too bad, and Sumiya was able to kill the boss and I moved on to the next chapter. Chapter 18 is more awkward than hard. Each path in this map is just 1 tile wide, so most enemies like to pile up on whoever is in that space. What I usually do is switch out the units who are in those paths, so then that way they aren't losing too much health. After doing this map for like 10 minutes, I kinda just got fed up with the slow pace and just had Sumiya fly over to the boss. You might be asking why I didn't just do this in the first place, and that is because I honestly forgot. Making my way to chapter 19, while this map was filled to the brim with enemies and constant reinforcements, I can't really say this one was challenging. A lot of the enemies had weaknesses, so as long as I used weapons like hammers or beast killers, the enemies went down really easily. Noe and Pane were especially useful for this map, since they could deal bonus damage to the Wyvern Riders and mounted units. Noe in particular was killing enemies left and right, so making that final push to the boss was really easy thanks to her. After letting Noe clear a route to the boss, I was able to take him down and move on to the next chapter. The start of chapter 20 is actually very challenging. I even lost a couple units near the beginning. In spite of that, once you get over that first hurdle, the rest of this map isn't that bad. Just take your time and the enemies aren't that big of a threat. Chapters 21, 22, and 23 are actually very similar stories. Chapter 21 has a lot of mages, but as long as you lead with units that have 2 range, it's really not that difficult. For chapter 22, all I did was have Sumiya fly Robin over to the boss, and he dealt with her very quickly. I'm just gonna throw this in there, this took me 30 seconds. Less than a minute to finish this chapter, that is actually crazy to me. Chapter 23 is a bit tricky, but as long as you don't overextend, this one isn't a problem. Honestly, the only annoying parts of this map are the reinforcements that show up that keep you from actually finishing it. Chapter 24 also has that exact same issue too. The map itself isn't difficult, but the constant reinforcements make this one take longer than it really needs to. This map almost reminds me of that whack-a-mole game you'll see at arcades. The moment you take out one, there's already 2 others ready to take its place. Making my way to chapter 25, I once again flew Robin over to the boss and he was able to finish her off with no issues. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's honestly kind of funny how Flight trivializes some of these maps. Like, you can finish these off really quickly as long as one of your units is a Pegasus Knight or something. Now, it's time to start the final boss battle. Everything I've done so far has led me to this fight. Every struggle I've endured has been leading up to this exact moment. I killed it in 2 turns. I was honestly a little shocked at how easily I defeated the final boss. To be fair, I did get lucky with an ether proc at the start of the fight, but still, that was no challenge at all. Finishing this game actually felt a little rewarding, and I was able to get it done in 7 hours and 28 minutes. With 1 game down, I was honestly feeling pretty good about how this challenge was going so far. The next game I decided to tackle was Fire Emblem Engage. It had been a while since I played this one, so I thought Engage was a good next step. In typical Fire Emblem fashion, the first couple chapters aren't really anything noteworthy. These chapters just aim to teach the player about basic mechanics and how the new emblem rings work, so it's nothing too hard. Chapter 4, however, is when things start to get a little bit more intense. During this chapter, you're given the Celica emblem, which is, in my opinion, one of the best emblems in the game, so to get it this early is a huge win to me. The enemies in this map are a bit more threatening, but as per usual, just take your time and you'll finish it. Chapter 5 is also not too bad, you just have to be patient with the enemies. The emblem rings do make dealing with hordes of enemies easier though, so you don't need to stress too much. After gaining access to the boss room, my strategy was to just use all my engage skills to deal as much damage as possible. Luckily for me, his health bar isn't too big, so the boss went down without too much trouble. Getting started with Chapter 6, this one is just tedious. Engage really likes to use fog in some of the maps, so not being able to see where the enemies are makes this chapter slower than the others. On the bright side though, no pun intended, we gain access to Emblem Micaiah, who allows any unit to use a staff, so we basically gained another healer. All things considered, this chapter isn't hard, it's just slow. Chapter 7 is when the difficulty starts to go up a bit, mostly because the boss in this map also has an emblem ring. A couple of my units did come close to dying, but Alchrist was able to kill the boss and I made my way over to Chapter 8. While this chapter looks threatening, it's actually a lot easier than it seems. All you really need to do is use the choke points and keep your units healed. With this strategy, I was able to take out the boss in under 15 minutes and make my way over to the next chapter. Chapters 9 and 10 are actually fairly simple, they just take a while to finish. You're given a wide open field to work with in Chapter 9, so if you do what I've said about 1,000,000 times over by now and take your time, you can get it done. Someone should do a little counter in the comments and see how many times I've said take your time, or don't overextend, or don't overstep. It's gotta be at least 30. 30 times if we collect all those together, that'd be hilarious. While Chapter 10 does have less enemies, it makes up for that by having 3 boss units. The first boss is a flyer, so if you just use a bow, it's no issue at all. The strategy I used for the second boss was just abusing the break mechanic. As long as the boss can't counterattack, you can get a little reckless to pile up some extra damage. For the third boss, you'll want to be very cautious. Not only can he create doubles of himself, but he can also use his engage attack from far away. However, once he's used both of these skills, he actually becomes pretty harmless, so all I did was use my engage attacks and finish him off with a leer. You know what, let's take a step back from the video for a second. How are you guys doing? Your guys' day going good? Anything interesting happen? I made some chicken and rice a couple days ago. Don't usually cook chicken very often. Use some McCormick Montreal and salt for seasoning. Oh my gosh, turned out so good. Put that in a pan with a little extra virgin olive oil. Oh my gosh, so good. You guys should try that out sometime. Well, anyway, back to the video. Chapter 11 is where things start to get really difficult. Not only are there tons of enemies, but you also lose all of your emblems. Narratively, I think this is an interesting part of the game, but this chapter can easily steam your hams if you let your guard down. Luckily for me, about halfway through you gain access to 3 new units and 2 new emblems, so that brings down the difficulty a bit. After successfully making it to the escape point, I moved on to the next chapter. Around this point in the challenge, I was already starting to feel a little bit of burnout. I had only gotten through 1.5 games so far, but it honestly felt like I'd been playing Fire Emblem games for weeks. I usually like to take a little break from video games after about an hour, but since I'd been playing for almost 4 hours straight, I think it was wearing on me a bit. Luckily for me though, I was able to get started on chapters 12 and 13. You might be asking yourself, why are these chapters so noteworthy? And that's because I can finally start using Fogado and Tamara. I just really enjoy those two characters, so finally having them in my army helped lift my spirits a bit. The chapters themselves aren't too hard. Chapter 12 has lots of sand, so as long as you use high movement units, it's not that bad. And for Chapter 13, while it does feature more fog, there's lots of torches you can light that give you more visibility. Chapter 14 is also really simple. This map once again has multiple bosses, but as long as you use your archers and mages, they really aren't a threat. Once again, Chapter 15 wasn't that hard, but I began to notice that N-Gage's maps are just really big, a little too big in my opinion. Not only that, but the base movement stat for most characters was reduced to 4 instead of the usual 5. So not only are maps bigger, but units move fewer spaces, making these chapters take longer than they really need to. During a casual run, this doesn't really matter as much, but all the time spent on these larger maps is really starting to add up. Chapter 16 isn't as bad as I remembered. Just use your flyers and you can get through this one. Chapter 17, on the other hand, oh my gosh, this map is just insane. Not only is this map just gigantic, you also have to defeat 6 bosses that also have emblem rings. Just to be fully transparent, this to me is when the game starts being unfair. 6 boss enemies with emblem rings is just way too much for one map. I actually had to take 2 breaks from this map. That's how drawn out and challenging I thought it was. My main strategy for this chapter was to just over-rely on my emblems and tanky units. While I didn't struggle that much, I still find the bosses in this chapter to just be absurd. After an hour and a half of slowly pushing my way through this map, I was just barely able to defeat all the bosses with my sanity still intact. Thankfully, Chapter 18 was a little bit easier, only because I abused Corrin's Dragon Vein ability and blocked off parts of the ship so the enemies couldn't attack me. You can say whatever you want about this strategy, but after dealing with everything in Chapter 17, I really didn't feel bad for cheesing all the tools given to me. Chapter 19. Oh my gosh, what actual madman at Intelligence Systems thought this chapter was fair? My main issue with this map is that it's full of miasma that increases the enemy's defense and resistance. That already feels really unfair to me, but what's even worse is that the enemies can just sit on those miasma spaces for as long as they want, and there's really not much you can do about that. Emblem Corrin can create ice that gets rid of the miasma, but that only covers about 6 tiles, and this map is huge. It would take forever to clear it all out. And the boss, holy crap, does he love to attack you at literally every chance he gets. I was eventually able to finish this map, but the really unfair difficulty put me in a bad mood, and I honestly had no interest in continuing N-Gage at the moment. Since N-Gage had left me completely mentally drained and frustrated, I figured the best idea was just to switch games. Since I had recently done the 12-hour challenge in Birthright, I thought trying to finish that game would be the best way to continue. When I got started with Fire Emblem Fates, I honestly felt drained and numb. N-Gage really did a number on me, so I was basically running on fumes at this point. I think switching to an easier game like Birthright will help, but all I can remember thinking in that moment was wanting this challenge to be over. Before I got started with the game, I thought choosing Path of Fates would be the best option. Not only do I skip about 30 minutes of content, but I can also just immediately get started with Birthright. Just like the last 2 games, the early game isn't difficult at all. I remember finishing these while zoning out for most of it. If you look back at my 12-hour challenge for Birthright, you'll know Chapter 8 is a map that I'm usually not too good at. However, this time around, I was able to finish it really quickly. It only took me 1 turn to defeat the boss, so that was a very nice surprise. Chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12 went down about the same as they usually do. I did have a couple units come close to dying in Chapter 9, but overall it wasn't that difficult. While Chapter 10 isn't my favorite, it went down better than usual this time because I just used my flyers. I used them to transport my stronger units, and they were able to clean up this map without issue. As for Chapter 11, as long as you don't overstep and use your archers, this one isn't too bad, it's just slow. And Chapter 12 has always been super easy. I just had Hinoka fly Korin over to the escape point. Unlike last time, Chapter 13 was much more manageable. Last time I tried this map, every enemy was really aggressive, which is something I didn't expect. This time around, I had more control over the battle, so I was able to finish this one up without much difficulty. Sorry if it sounds like I'm speeding through my Birthright playthrough, but in all honesty, this game was just going by really fast. I wasn't struggling with the maps or the enemies that much, so I was making pretty good time. Chapter 14 was another fast-moving chapter, especially when it came to fighting the boss. All the enemies outside of the fortress weren't that much of an issue, and as for the enemies inside, I just used all the dragon veins to reduce their health. I did sadly lose Kagero to a general, but other than that, this one wasn't that bad. Chapter 15 is when I started to get a little too cocky with how well I was doing. In the previous chapter, I was able to grab a Beast Killer Lance, so Hinoka was tearing through these enemies really easily. However, I ended up pushing a little too far and Hinoka was killed by the boss. That kinda helped me remember that I still do need to pay attention, even if things are going well. Other than that minor slip-up, this chapter wasn't too bad. The reinforcements near the end were a little annoying, but that's all. Chapters 16 and 17 were once again fairly unproblematic. Around these chapters, I started to notice that a couple of my units like Rinka and Reina were falling behind a bit, which I thought was a little odd. Last time I played Birthright, I over-relied on Ryoma, so much so that basically every other unit in my army was under-leveled in the late game. So when I got started with Birthright, I decided to only use Ryoma when I thought it was necessary. For the most part, my units were doing good, but I might have accidentally let a couple slip under the radar. Chapter 18, like usual, went down really easily. Just have Hinoka attack Leo with a Beast Killer Lance and you can finish this one in under a minute. Chapters 19 and 20 do take a little time to get through, and that's just because of the way the maps are laid out, but other than that, they're not that hard. As for Chapter 21, I just copied my strategy from last time and had a flyer fly Ryoma to the boss. In Chapter 22, it's actually really easy to get overwhelmed due to the high enemy density in this chapter. What I did was let Kagero bait out as many enemies as she could and hoped she could kill them with a counterattack. I then set up some units near the bottom so they could deal with the occasional reinforcements that would appear. Reina and Kagero did sadly end up dying in the middle of the chapter, but Takumi and Korin were able to pick up the slack and finish off all the other enemies. Chapter 23 definitely is dangerous, since Camilla will launch fireballs at your units as you get closer to her. I'm not really the biggest fan of this chapter since you spend a lot of your time healing your units. About halfway through this chapter, I randomly got the idea to just push ahead with Kagero and Ryoma. I figured since they've been doing so well, why not just overstep and see what happens? Shockingly enough, my terrible idea worked, and they actually tanked every enemy. Sometimes my ideas are so bad they wrap back around to being good. Moving on from my tactical genius, Chapter 25 is actually kind of hard. 2 enemies in this room have access to fire orbs, which can actually deal a large amount of damage, and I'm just not interested in having my units be halfway dead the entire chapter. I decided to make Kagero and Ryoma run past all the enemies in the room and focus on killing the boss, while letting everyone else clean up whoever was left. I did end up losing a couple units, but the boss went down and I continued on to the next chapter. Chapter 25 ended up playing out the exact same way as the previous chapter. Kagero and Ryoma have been soloing every enemy they come across, so I've kinda just been letting them lead while I let everyone else kinda just do whatever. Chapter 26 is another super easy map. I just had Saizo unlock the door, then let Kagero kill Xander. Unlike last time, Korin could have killed Xander on his own, but I just thought it would be funnier if someone else did it. Moving on to the final chapter of the game, to my surprise, it wasn't as hard as last time. Most of my units didn't have any trouble killing the enemies, so that helped out a lot. What helped out even more was that earlier in the run, I got a Hexing Rod, which can lower an enemy's HP. Garon has a huge health bar, so I thought using a hexing rod would make this easier. After using the hexing rod, Sakura somehow landed a 34% hit rate on Garon. Thanks to this debuff, Corrin was able to take down Garon super easily, so now it's time to move on to Phase 2. My idea was the exact same as last time. Create a path to Garon, then let Sakura use her hexing rod. This time around, she had a 64% hit rate, a lot better than last time, but she still could end up missing. To my surprise though, the rod once again was successful, and Ryoma killed Garon without any issue. I'm still a little surprised with how easy this run actually went. I think this was one of the easiest Birthright playthroughs I've ever had. I was also able to finish Birthright in only 4 hours and 45 minutes. After finishing Birthright way faster than I estimated, I took some time to think about how I wanted to move forward with this challenge. Birthright did put me in a better mood, but I was still feeling somewhat drained after doing this challenge for so long. Just thinking about playing another Fire Emblem game made me feel fatigued. Keep in mind, I had been playing Fire Emblem games for 4 to 5 hours every day for 3 days straight, so this challenge was really starting to wear on me. I ended up making the decision that my well-being was more important than finishing a game. I know I could probably push through and finish Engage, but I think doing that would make me feel miserable. So what I decided to do was tackle Sacred Stones just to see if my mood would reset a bit, then try and come back to Engage a little bit later. Getting started with Sacred Stones, man, playing these older games takes a little getting used to. Sacred Stones just doesn't have all the modern day features, so things like navigating menus and initiating combat can feel a little awkward. Moving on to the actual game, like usual, the first few chapters aren't that hard, so I was able to wrap them up fairly quickly. Chapter 3 is a little awkward due to the tiny hallways in this map, but as long as you let Erica and Seth do all the heavy lifting, it's nothing too crazy. Chapter 4 gives you a lot of room to work with, so you'd have to go out of your way to struggle on this one. Chapter 5 does look a little scary near the start, however, if you just bait them out using Seth, this one becomes less overwhelming. Recruiting Joshua is a little difficult since you need to make sure you don't kill him before you speak to him, but other than that, this chapter isn't that bad. For Chapter 6, you're given a lot of strong units, so you don't really need to worry about them dying. This chapter did take me a bit since I got a little lost in the map layout, but other than that, this chapter is a free win. The only real difficulty that comes from Chapter 7 is the fog that blocks your view. There are a couple of strong enemies in this map, but if you use Lute and Seth, they really shouldn't cause too much trouble. Chapters 8, 9, and 10 also aren't too noteworthy. They do take a little time to get through due to the obstacles on the map, but other than that, these chapters aren't that bad. Chapter 10 is visually pretty interesting, at least in my opinion. It's nothing too crazy, just 2 islands connected by a bridge, but still, I honestly thought it was kinda cool. This next chapter actually caused me a decent amount of trouble. Recruiting Enes, Garrick, and Tethys is actually a real challenge since you have to first recruit Enes with Erica, then talk to Garrick with Enes, then lastly recruit Tethys with Garrick. This wouldn't be so bad if Enes and Garrick didn't constantly move away from each other. Even if it is a little difficult to recruit them all, it's worth the investment since all 3 of them are extremely useful. The first time I tried this map, it took me 15 minutes to recruit them all. A little slow, but not too bad. However, right after I recruited them all, Erica was hit with a sleep spell, and she's required to finish the chapter. It sucks even more because sleep doesn't wear off on its own. You need a special staff that I don't have, so I was basically soft-locked from actually completing this chapter. I then had to restart the map and re-recruit everyone all over again while avoiding the sleep staff. I did manage to also recruit Marissa in this chapter, but she sadly ended up dying, and I honestly didn't feel like restarting again just to recruit her. Believe it or not, but this one chapter alone took over an hour to finish, so that didn't help either. Moving on to Chapter 12, this one once again is just really slow. Not only is the map decently sized, but it's also covered in fog, so that makes the pace even slower. Thankfully, I did bring a staff that lights up some of the foggy spaces, but it was still a little annoying. My tanky units like Seth, Tana, and Lute were able to clean up this map without too much trouble, but it was kind of a slog to get through. Once I finished that chapter, I saw that I only had a little more than 1 hour left. I had hoped that maybe if I worked fast I could finish Sacred Stones, but I definitely overestimated myself with that one. By this point, I knew it would be almost impossible to finish another game, so I decided to return to Engage, not to continue the campaign, but to finish up some side quests. I know I said side quests aren't mandatory, but I just wanted to see how much I could get done with the time I had left. The first chapter I started with was Lucina's Paralogue. Right off the bat, I was already in a better mood, not struggling to defeat huge groups of enemies or needing to kill a boss with a giant health bar made this game so much more enjoyable. The chapter itself wasn't hard, a lot of the enemies were really weak, but I was having a good time regardless. The next map I tackled was the Radiant Hero. This one is a bit more difficult, but still doable. This map is full of enemies, but if you bait them out then use your Engage weapons, they go down really easily. Ike himself was really easy to defeat too. I just piled up all my Engage skills and he was no issue. Since I had just recently finished Fates, I thought why not try out Corrin's chapter. This was another really easy one. The enemies can't really do any damage either. Every time I play this chapter, it always has me wanting an HD Fates remaster. I don't really think that's gonna happen, but let a guy dream. The final map I tried out was the Mysterious Merchant. This one is designed for the early game, so all the enemies are literally zero threat. Sometimes even the easy chapters can still be satisfying. By this point, I had a little more than 5 minutes left in the challenge. I could have maybe tried to squeeze in one more chapter, but I thought a better way to end it would be by doing some Somnial activities. Things like the gym and fishing aren't too crazy, but fun minigames to pass the time. And then, the timer hit 0. The challenge was officially over. This challenge was difficult, and something I don't think I want to do again for a little while, but I was glad I was able to push through and finally get it done. Even though this challenge was only 30 hours, I honestly gained a lot more respect for content creators who do these videos on the regular. While challenges like this might not seem too bad on the outside, they actually take a decent amount of work, even if it is just playing video games. In the end, I was able to get through 2.5 games. Not as many as I was expecting, but still a decent number. Hopefully you guys liked this video. I know it was a bit different than my usual content, but I've been trying to make videos that seem a little more interesting to me. Make sure to like and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I love you, and I will see you all later. I'm so hungry right now, it's not even funny.